Hello, Mr. Yard. This is my rendition of an Egyptian pharaoh's tomb from the Valley of the Kings. So it's not a pyramid, but one of the dug-in tombs into the sides of mounds that they do in Upper Egypt, down in the Valley of the Kings. So this one specifically is KB 62. It's based off of King Tut's tomb that we see and was discovered in 1922 by Howard Carter. So, entering, of course, the first feature we see is this stairway down that leads all the way down into the passage. So this little hallway here is what we call the passage. It's a very interesting part of this tomb, but yeah, in the passage, what the passage leads into is a part of his tomb called the antechamber. So here in the antechamber, we see a few of the artifacts that his people buried him with. So here on the left, the first thing that I'm going to talk about is the tomb, or is the throne. So the throne of King Tut, quite famous. I think he had a few buried with him, but I just did one here. So to represent the tomb, I use these trapdoors on the side. The throne, I use these trapdoors on the side, and the scaffolding, which will serve as the little seat part. I use the scaffolding because I know I saw one of his thrones, and it had this exact same like weaving thing going on here. So that's why I chose that. Now, this part over here, these over here are wheels to one of his many chariots. He had a bunch of wheels disassembled here in his tomb, and then this here would be the chariot, and it was disassembled too. So to get it in from the outside, they would have disassembled it and put it in here. So these here are like the axles to the chariot, and then if he's on this chariot with his like sword or spear, then he would be like right up here, waiting to go. But I guess that'd be for a military chariot, because the thing with King Tut is he had a few. He had some for hunting specifically. He had some for combat, of course, but he also had some for just parade ground use, so to speak. So very interesting man. Now in this chest over here, we have some things that he was buried with. So this is the sword of Tutankhamun. I named it. But yeah, he had many swords, bows, he had arrows too. But something else that he was interestingly buried with was a walking stick. Now, I didn't know this until recently, but yeah, King Tut apparently, he had, I guess either through injury or deformity due to incest, but he had a few deformities, so he had to use a cane, a walking stick. So that's what I buried him with there. And I also gave him underwear of the Boy King. So something else I found out was that he was buried with a lot of underwear, a lot of clothing, a lot of robes, which we don't usually talk about when talking about ancient Egypt, the things that they're buried with. But I found it was very interesting that they buried him with all that. Now, moving out of this side of the antechamber, we find ourselves in a little room here that goes down about 3 steps into the annex. So in the annex, what they said is that what a lot of people say, a lot of Egyptologists say, is that this is where, after a few tomb raidings by grave robbers, that all the things that were broken and didn't work, they just shoved in here. So as you mentioned, there's a lot of but another thing that's interesting though is that there's a lot of baskets and pottery and jars here that would all carry stuff that would be essential to him in his afterlife. So you have oils, you have fragrances, you have different ointments, all these things, wine, all you stored in these jars and pots and baskets here that he would have brought with him. Now going back into the antechamber on this side, you see a couple of one of his funeral beds, / couches. So this one here specifically, I modeled it after I think one that said it was like part of a cow, so I put the tails there as like a double cow. I use these as the bed posts, and up here those are his tails. Now as we leave this room, something else that we find that's a little bit interesting entering into the burial chamber, we see these two statues here. Now, these two statues apparently were actual like models of King Tut. Now, the reason why he had them was because in the afterlife he'd still need his physical soul to remain in order to pass on. So this is like the representation of his ka that they buried with him, and they would stand right here as you approach into the burial chamber. And yeah, so we had them both there. They had some gold clothing on them, but they're very completely blacked out statues. So I represented that with with this kind of coloring. Now, with Minecraft, the sad thing is that you can't really get hieroglyphics or paintings, but I tried to find that representation. So as we enter near the sarcophagus here, I use these chiseled sandstone blocks to be sort of like his hieroglyphics that we would see in this room, because this room here, the burial chamber, was the only room that actually had any type of actual like art or cave painting. Some people think that the reason why this existed was because King Tut originally wasn't supposed to go in this tomb in the first place, but because he did, they only painted one room of it. And so these would be some hieroglyphics that I tried to draw. A little limited in how small I can make them, so I just made a couple letters, but just get that representation, I put them here. So of course we have this is also the only room with a lot of like artistry going on. So we had all the different paintings. These of course aren't them, but you have paintings with him and Osiris, him and Seth, all the different funeral processions. There's even one, I believe it's called the opening of the mouth ceremony, where basically, and it's very important for like getting the dead body into the afterlife. Now, moving into the cooler thing, I built a representation of his actual coffin, this gold coffin. So this here would just be my representation of the exterior of the coffin. So that would be, the front that we see, like the cool face of his that we see. And then his feet obviously are on this side. The arms in real life, they'd cross over and they'd be holding two tools that they have. I don't remember the name specifically, but they would just cross it over them. Maybe I'll remember it for the end of the video if I can. But in this, then you'd find the other, the linen wrappings with the funeral mask on him. So that's that 22 pound of gold funeral mask. And then in the tomb, though, I also put the curse of King Tut. So of course I can't type in hieroglyphics, but the English translation is, "Death comes on swift wings to he who disturbs the tomb of the Pharaoh." Now, famously, Howard Carter, when he discovered it, he died, I think, 10 years after the tomb was discovered. And Lord Carnarvon, who went with him, also died, I believe, like 1 year after from a mosquito bite. I believe he got like malaria and died. So while we don't always know if these curses were real, that's kind of what happened to those two. So don't want to test it out. Don't want to go grave robbing Mr. King Tut over here. Now, the final tiniest room in the entire building here is what they call the treasury. So the first thing that you obviously see is this weird creature thing. Now, I'm limited with what I could make in the game, but I tried my best to make one of the sculptures of Anubis. So Anubis, quite famously, is the god of the dead, if I'm not mistaken, and mummification. So they put him right here in the treasury, sort of watching over King Tut. But yeah, he has the head of a jackal. So this is my close representation here to the head of a jackal, and he's a completely black statue. So it's a very cool looking statue. Now, the reason I see all these boats here is because in King Tut's tomb, he quite famously had, I believe, 32 model boats, and all those model boats were supposed to be used by him once he made it into the afterlife. They would either be what he'd use for fishing, so recreation, or they would even be transporting him to the afterlife, and even in the afterlife, they'd be serving as his way of transportation. Now, moving over here to these chests, we see some other cool things. So this chest here, quite famously, almost all the organs inside ancient Egyptian pharaohs were taken out and put into canopic jars, except the brain, which they removed by breaking the nose, pulling out through the nose, and they didn't keep that. They didn't see it as important. The heart as well wouldn't be in one of these. It was being weighed against the feather of Mot. But in these here, we have a canopic jar for the liver. We have a canopic jar for the intestines, a canopic jar for the stomach, and a canopic jar for the lungs. Now, in my written explanation, I'll explain more like the importance of these items and the different gods that you'd see on them. For example, guardians of these like little mummified organs, you'd like on the top you'd put a god's image. So to get that sort of like humanoid god-ish image, I used a little totem that has like a miniature face on it, just get that same effect. Now in here as well, I just put a few emeralds and diamonds and quartz because along with the king, he was buried with a lot of different jewelry with him. So that represents the jewelry that he would have had. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. So if I'm not mistaken, that should be it. Let me just see if I can make sure I covered everything I wanted to cover. I believe that I did. But yeah, it's very interesting how the entirety of King Tut, how he's buried, how they discovered him, like and the fact that most of this building here a lot of it was untouched by grave robbers. So, and the only grave robbers that came early on, like right after it was built. So they didn't steal too much. So when Howard Carter and the Lord Carnarvon came here and found all this, you could have imagined how surprised they'd be to actually see such an intact tomb. And then I guess to make the sarcophagus, I guess I'll talk about that. To make the sarcophagus, I use sandstone, of course, and then I use this chiseled sandstone here now to get sort of that, like I undid the lid. I made it sort of an angle, so it's sort of, if you can imagine it, normally it'd be like sort of bent over a bit, and you'd have all of your guys kind of look for who lives in here, just like prying it open with crowbars and whatnot. But yeah, it's a very interesting thing. Alright, now leaving. I guess before I go, I'll talk about like how I built it. So I actually looked at maps of the real thing. I tried finding maps of this whole building's construction, and it was very cool to make. Like all this looks as exactly how it should. I'm not sure about the orientation. Like the orientation north, east, south, west might be off, but in terms of like the dimensions, I tried roughly making it how I would, like even from the point, what part of the room would the doorway be? Like this part, doorway right in the middle, this one a little bit off to the side, this one right in the center goes right into this one, but this building extends past it. So yeah, that's pretty much a summary of my construction. Now, leaving the tomb, you see it's now daylight, and it's completely sort of hidden into this mountain here. So that is my Pharaoh's tomb. It's my construction of a Pharaoh's tomb. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll talk to you soon. Have a good one.